Okay, we are live. Chris Fusting. Cheers.
Cheers, Alec. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Welcome to the Super Connector podcast.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do here today, it's great to have you here. And what we're going to do is we're going to get into some subjects that you find interesting and that you are knowledgeable about, and basically look at what the connections are between those subjects. We'll also explore our own personal connection a little bit, just so people know who I am, who you are, and how we came to be doing this together right now. So let's get into this. We have, first of all, what's your spirit animal?
Every time I'm asked this question, it always comes back to lion, because I've made that decision quickly in the past. But I've never had a better answer, so I think it might be lion.
Cool. Power animal. All right, so let's start from the present moment. Who are you and what do you do?
It's a good question. So I'm Chris Fusting, and I'm a dad, for one thing. I'm a new dad. I have a daughter who's about 2.
Yay.
And you do too, right? I mean, we're about on the same schedule.
Yeah, we're both pretty new dads, so excited to hear a little bit about that experience for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, it's quite a journey, and just filled with amazing things and challenging things. But currently, professionally, I run the AI initiative at a company called Railink, and we have all of North America's railroad data. And our goal is to try and help, put simply, we want to help the trains run on time. But more kind of specifically, we want to get velocity up, we want to get bandwidth up, we want to make things safer. So we're just trying to make the rail industry better by using artificial intelligence, which is really just a fancy way for saying basic pattern matching that makes good decisions or informs good decisions on our behalf.
Wow, okay. So you're doing something pretty different. I feel like the last time I talked to you, you were teaching advanced mathematics.
Yeah, right. So I was that grad school when I was teaching math?
I suppose so, yeah.
Yeah.
You tell me.
I mean, yeah, I studied mathematics at the University of Vermont, and it was with the end, earlier in my 20s, I decided I really wanted to study math because I really wanted to understand how to build these models and how to make predictions. That sounded really cool and fun. And so I ended up at the University of Vermont in a place called the Complex Systems Center, and so I was teaching math a lot, and that was a lot of fun. But I still actually teach today at Railink. I kind of give the AI math, but kind of high level too. And I know that one of the things you said you wanted to get into is kind of like math for non-mathematicians, and it's actually something that I spend an hour doing a week, is to try to get the ideas across and say, hey, this is just the story, right? This math writing. And I have some interesting examples actually of when math was actually just writing, which is something that we don't always think about.
Awesome. I'm excited to pick your brain about that a little bit, because it's pretty much uncharted territory for me. Although I'm very interested in it, actually. As you probably know, one of my favorite artists is MC Escher, and he was very mathematical and had a deep level of precision and craftsmanship in his work.
Yeah, he did.
So we're gonna really go wild style in these questions and just see where it goes. So with that in mind, can you give us one or a couple of your favorite artists and why?
So I guess kind of unarguably my favorite artist is Dali. And for anyone who probably has spent a lot of time studying art, that's probably like, talking with someone that has listened to some rock and roll and having them say their favorite artist is the Rolling Stones, or maybe more recently Metallica. Just because he was so popular and he's so well known and everyone knows him. So of course his favorite artist is Dali. But and I don't study a lot of visual art, but I do have one very old rare book I was able to buy, which is actually Dali's original. What is this thing called? It's called the 50 Secrets. Oh
yeah.
So we had this at Warren Wilson, this book, and I picked up a copy of it, and they're hard to get. And
the 50 Secrets of Magic Craftsmanship, if you're listening at home.
Yeah, it is. It is. So maybe you like some of Dali's paintings, you think, wow, of course, everybody likes Dali or something like that. But if you've read through this, like this is where he shows dropping the key.
Yes.
So, right, and he would drop it. He fell asleep, right? And then his brainwaves go into beta right before sleep. And then he found that to be a very creative time, which in neuroscience and in therapies like neurofeedback, we know is actually a very beneficial state for creativity and for relaxing. So anyway.
Did you say beta or theta?
Oh, that's a good question. It's definitely...
I think it's theta.
Yeah, I'm going to go with your advice on this.
Okay. I think it's theta. So what he's talking about is napping with a really heavy key held in your hand that's held above a plate. And so basically what happens is as soon as you drift off and lose consciousness for a second, you drop the key and it clangs on the plate and wakes you up. So you get like this very special, extremely quick nap, and it puts you into that special mind state, which is especially good for creation, according to Dali.
Yeah, exactly.
I love Dali as well, and I think one of the things I love about him most is he was a true absurdist, like really embracing the absurd and the ridiculous. I would say largely just for the sake of doing that, like he was deeply committed to creating these surreal and absurd experiences, and he's actually the first person who I saw their career and was like, oh, being an artist might be something I could do. Like he was the spark in my mind, so very inspiring to me as well.
Well, I'm glad to hear. I feel like that gives some credit to my, I have many of his books. I'm very obsessed with Dali, and my daughter now looks through that giant coffee table book of paintings, the big Dali book. But
awesome, good influence to have for her.
I think so. Yeah.
So let's get let's go right back to the beginning. When exactly were you born?
Right. So as indicated in the wee hours, the exact hour, I'm not exactly sure. But in the wee hours of February 26th, 1984.
Okay. New York City, correct?
Greenwich Village, yeah.
Awesome. That's an interesting place and an interesting time to be born. For the record, we're looking at a Pisces here. Very much a fish. Swimming both ways, often or sometimes at the same time.
I feel that.
Your parents, we're gonna, just from your childhood, I'd like you to tell me one meaningful experience that you felt what sort of shaped your pathway or your perception.
It's interesting trying to pick out a single meaningful experience from all of childhood, but
do a couple if you need to.
Well, I think actually, so here's a funny one. My first memory is being at my own 3-year-old birthday party, and we all were given animal masks. And I was growing around growling, and I think I actually was a lion. So it may have been where I picked up my spirit from.
So, sorry, go ahead.
And I at some point got up onto the couch. And remember, these are like 3-year-olds, right? And this is my 3rd birthday party. Confirmed, verified information from my parents. I get on the couch and I just start to roar at just kind of everywhere and anywhere at all of the participants of my party. And that is the first thing that I remember doing.
The first thing that you remember doing?
That's literally the first thing. It was just roaring at my party guests from the couch. The second thing that I remember doing is kicking my legs on the blue couch in our other room because I had to poop and I didn't want to go. And I remember very clearly, and this has come up with my daughter, not wanting to poop ever. And if I got on the couch and kicked my legs, this would somehow discourage the poop from moving any further through my colon or through my large intestine, and it would put it at bay for a while. And my parents would ask me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I just like to kick," because I didn't want to admit the true purpose of my
Makes sense. Sometimes you got to hide your cards.
Yeah, right. But it's yeah, those are actually some of my strongest, I mean, at least earliest first memories. I mean, childhood is long. I feel like you have to cap the, you have to cap the age. Are we talking 30 here as in a childhood? 20 or 10?
How long did it take you to grow up? Was it when you found out your wife was pregnant, or when she gave birth?
Are we grown up? I mean, I think that's an interesting, sometimes I think about what I've learned in the last 5 or 10 years, and I look at people maybe for some of the first time in my life that in their 60s or 70s, I think, man, I don't know shit. Like, they got another 30 on me. And they just
got that perspective. You're farther than a lot of people are. In my 20s, I thought I knew shit.
Exactly. I mean, actually getting older teaches you, if nothing else, that you know nothing. Except you might know one thing really well and get bored of it, and then it feels like you know nothing. And then
it's just layers and layers and layers. It keeps on going.
Yeah.
You can always go deeper or further or higher.
Yeah, we should discuss, by the way, I know you do have a propensity for the artistic study of infinity. We should discuss at least a little bit of infinity stuff, because it's a great mathematician. What the hell's his name? Someone's dust. That went mad twice because he found that there are infinite numbers of different sized infinities. So I'm more than happy to get into that.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, let me connect with my my whiteboard here, because I think it's relevant.
Diving right in. So for some context for everybody else, during my senior thesis at our college, Warren Wilson College, I chose speaking of being a young man and thinking you know something, I chose the subject of infinity for my senior art project. So I was obsessing over this concept for a good, like, I don't know, 6 to 9 months or so, using various different ways to explore the subject with mirrors reflecting on mirrors, and thinking about the concept of cycles and cycles within cycles and circles within circles. The idea of seeing something as reflected in a circle being like sort of this like, not microcosm per se, but just like a simple symbolic representation of the idea of infinity is those reflection in a circle, because it has that Ouroboros infinite loop, as well as the mirrors on mirrors. So spent a lot of time exploring that. I'll be sharing pictures of that, but just to give you guys some context as to where that came from.
All right, so don't forget the skull. What was it? Was it Cantor? Of course it was Cantor. Yeah, Cantor dust. Okay, so if you could let my tablet into the meeting, I will be able to draw on a whiteboard for it. There we go.
Okay, awesome. And I am, now that I'm noticing, I am hearing that noise that you're talking about.
Let's see if we can fix that for you.
Is there anything we can do?
Yep, I believe there is. So let's settings.
Can you hear it? Oh, it's gone. Oh, you're gone too.
Testing.
Okay, you're gone again.
Testing.
Oh.
Testing.
You're back.
Testing.
You're back. Squeal is back.
Testing.
Squeal is softer.
Testing.
Softer.
Testing.
Okay. Now I can hear you and I can't hear it.
The infinite squeal.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, oh no, only the host can share in this meeting. Are we able to perhaps change that?
Let's see if I can, how about now?
I try. There we are. Okay. So I picked up this tablet so I could teach with a whiteboard during the pandemic effectively. Without a whiteboard, it's really difficult, in my opinion, to express ideas. So,
okay.
Actually, I had a very serious academic accident at work. I didn't file for it or anything, but we were moving a whiteboard from floor to floor, and I had two people who were in charge of making sure that it didn't hit any walls, like the wheels, because the whiteboard is here, there's wheels coming out. And both of them at the same instant, against the odds, talked to people, because it is a 500-person company, so everyone kind of knows everybody. And then it stopped, and I jammed my fingernail came off. Academic kind of accident.
Extreme whiteboard incident.
Exactly. Okay, so just the idea of infinity, right? Okay, so in math we have things called sets, and here is a set that contains a triangle, square, loosely speaking, and a circle. Okay, so a set in math is just a collection of unique objects. They don't have to be numbers. So you can, for anyone listening right now, when people told you math was numbers, math has nothing to do with numbers. It's just about logically reasoning about objects, essentially. And a set is a collection of unique objects. So we'll call this set duck. So I've just chosen a symbol to represent this set, right? So this set of a triangle, circle, and a square is a duck, right? So
I was hoping there were going to be some duck drawings involved in this podcast. So
I actually submitted a homework in which I used no Greek letters as symbols. I used only penguins, ducks, and other animals to represent numbers. And it was accepted, but it was suggested that for convention and clarity, that in grad school, in the next homework, I should consider using symbols like alpha, beta, nu, etc.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It was accepted by the great mathematician Richard Foote, who actually wrote literally the book on abstract algebra. So of course, I've actually never really studied, most to his chagrin. So here's another set. This is a what we call a blackboard N, which just means it's like a big N. And this set looks like this, because 1, 2. So we're all pretty familiar with this one. These are the natural numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can just keep going, right? Infinitely. We know that we can count infinitely. And this is a truth that we would call self-evident. We don't need to prove that I can continue to count to infinity, because we have a very straightforward base 10 counting system from which to do this, right? You get to 10, you get to 20, you get to 100. We know exactly how to add more numbers to this sequence, unquestionably. So if we had an infinite amount of time, we could keep going forever, right? So that's just we would call that an axiom. This is a self-evident truth. Like, obviously this is true. So when we talk about things like infinity, what we usually talk about is one, can we go infinitely? But what is the distinction between something that's infinite and finite? Well, this is it right here. Let's count. 1, 2, 3. Right? So 1, 2, 3, not infinite, right? I have a finite, duck is a finite set. So that's pretty straightforward. I think we're all pretty comfortable with that idea, right? So each one of these we have mapped a number to it. And in math, what I might do is define a function f, right? And f will take shape. And then after it takes that shape, it'll tell us what number it is, okay? So what we can see is that this is a mapping from a subset, in this case 1, 2, 3 of the natural numbers, or mapping from shapes to numbers. So triangle goes to 1, square goes to 2, circle goes to 3. So we've counted it, and it's finite. And the reason it's finite... Hi, sweetie. Daddy's busy right now. Daddy loves you. By the way, those are me and her do joint paint, like, speaking of art, these are joint works on the door behind me and all that. Okay. Does that make sense? We're going to do infinite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's do it.
Look at my drawing. The interesting thing about infinite is that we've already actually figured out, and it's self-evident, that the natural numbers are infinite. Okay. So I think what would be interesting is to talk about what a bigger infinity than the natural numbers might be. So these are, I can't press my thumb when I'm using this application. These go 1, 2, 3, 4, forever. Okay. And so we usually denote cardinality, that is the size, by saying something like this, right? And we could say, oh, the natural numbers equals infinity. Well, that's cool. Well, can we construct a bigger infinity? So what if we played this game? What if we said, I would like to create a new set? And I'm going to make this one, we usually denote it like this. So we have 2 to the natural numbers. This is called a power set. And here's the game we play with a power set. We say it is a set of sets. So the first element of this thing is the empty set, nothing. The first element of our new 2 to the n set is just the nothing set. Okay, we actually, probably a little bit of an abusive notation. We usually just do this. But then we're going to have a set with 1 in it. We'll have a set with 2 in it. ... forever. So we're going to include a set that has every unique element of the naturals in it. And you can see right here that already we have as big an infinity as the natural numbers, because this new set is going to have all of the things in the naturals. But then what we'll say is, well, that's neat. But let's say that goes on infinitely, right? But then let's make a new one. We'll do another one so we'll continue down here. And we'll say, I would like to add in this other set, which is every possible pair of the natural numbers. So 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4. And you can see that that would very clearly add another amount of things that would be infinite, because for every one, there's another number, right? So, and then we can just keep going, and like, well God, we forgot, you know, we could do 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 3, 4. Okay. So, oh God, what just happened? Go away, thing. It's just, I don't know if you can see that or not. Probably not. Go away, notes. But anyway, you get the idea, is that we have now we've already just in 3 simple steps here, 1, 2, 3, have found that we have 3 times the number of elements in the natural numbers, which we already knew to be infinite, in this new thing that we call the power set of the natural numbers. And then you could take the power set of power sets and the power set of power set of power sets. And then here Cantor arrived at this idea of an infinite number of infinitely sized sets using as its basis just the simple counting numbers. I'd like you to go away, notes. Questions about that, Alec?
No, I got into a little bit of this when I was doing my project, but I think it's cool to think about and cool to have it, you know, expressed visually also.
So that's the basic idea. Then the other example that I think is worthwhile is to look at just the regular old number line from 0 to 1. On this number line, we could play a different game. And the way that this game would work is every iteration, we just cut it in half. Right? So then this would happen at 1/2. Cut it in half again and get 1/4. Cut it in half again, and we get 1/8. Right? And so what you'll begin to see here is that what we've done is we've kind of implicitly defined this function where if we give it something, if we give it 2, the way that this sequence works is we would say it's, this might be a little bit confusing, but we could just do this. It's 1/2, right? And then it's 1/2 squared, 1/2 to the third, 1/2 to the fourth. We keep cutting it in half, right, by a power of 2. But what we're noticing here is that this is really 2 to the 1, right? And this original 1 is actually 1/2 to the 0. So what we've noticed here is that these are the natural numbers in the exponent, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Right? But we know the natural numbers are infinite, so we could play that game forever and never, ever, ever get to 0. We get really close.
Yeah, that's really crazy. I remember coming across this also during my project. So you're saying there's an infinity between 0 and 1.
You could play the same game from 0 and 1/4, and you could find another infinity. So here, any place in the real number line between 2 numbers, you find not only an infinity, but an infinity so dense that you never actually get there. And if anyone has ever, if you've ever studied calculus or interested in that, we would describe this as the limit. If we call this exponent here, you know, these guys up here, just call that n. As n goes to infinity, right, what is the limit of 2 to the n. And what that would do for us is we would get infinitely close to that 0, but we'd never actually get there. But what we're interested in is if we were somehow able to traverse infinity and get to infinity, where would we get? Well, this equals 0. We would actually end up getting there. And that's by definition. We have defined that. We have said as mathematicians, you'll eventually get to 0. Or, yeah, I mean, kind of like if you can never do this. You can never do it infinite numbers of times. But if you did, you'd get to 0. And that thing never exists. But that's the basis for all modern mathematics. So it's very, infinity is a hugely important in everything that we do today.
Very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Did you have some more you want to say about that, or should we? I had another question.
Oh, go on.
Yeah. Just quickly, what can you tell us about 0?
Zero didn't exist for a long time.
Yeah.
And in my
about that, wow.
Yeah, my mid to mid 20s, when I was diving into math to try and understand the world in a different light, I was watching all these, like the history of mathematics, and yeah, it didn't make any sense to people. How could you have 0 as something? You have at least 1.
You can't.
Right?
Or can you?
And I think it was the Egyptians or the Babylonians. One of them, they were very interested in mathematics for practical reasons, like merchants and building pyramids. And it was the Egyptians, yeah. But the Greeks were really interested in it from a more theoretical perspective, and did a lot of early work in geometry. But the merchants were like, well, if you have 0 of something, it doesn't cost anything, so we don't care about that stuff. That stuff it's not useful. I don't care how many zeros of land you own. I care about how many somethings of land you own, so that I can tax you on it. So that's interesting.
So 0 was discovered in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, one might argue that all math is a discovery, because really what we do is we define some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We say, I wonder if this is true, and then we use deductive reasoning, which is different from most of science, all of science, really. It's unique to math. Most of science, like physics, for example, like you would never take gravity for granted, right? You're pretty damn sure that gravity exists through your jumping and various bone-breaking experiences. This feels like the real deal.
Yeah, I like the gravity sports. I rely on it heavily.
So the differentiator there is that in math, we don't use experimental evidence. The way we discover things in math is by using the principles of deductive reasoning. That is saying, if this, then this. If these 3 things, then these 2 things. Like very clear, this must be the case. And we build up our math based on that, and you define something, and then you conjecture something, and then you prove through deductive reasoning that is definitely true, which gives you a theorem, and then using that theorem you can make new theorems. You just keep creating new truths, or what people might call discoveries. Whereas in a field like physics, we observe gravity, we write some equations that make sense to us, and we over and over and over again we do experiments with this, what is a theory, and then at some point we turn a theory into a law when it has been proven, or experimentally proven, thousands and tens of thousands or millions of times, that has never been disproven. Then we call that a law. But the law of gravity is not as strong as the law of 1 over 2 to the n equaling 0 in the limit, which is the definition. Anyway, it's a different deduction versus, what's a good example? Based on what you know with numbers, if you have two of one, then you have two, right? And we're able to deductively prove that. But if you throw an apple up and it comes back down, it hits the ground a million times, you haven't deduced that to be true. You've inferred experimentally that to be true, and therefore it's a law. So it's a little bit different.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know.
Small distinctions.
Yeah, I'm really thankful you're putting these words to it right now. Actually, some things I've been curious about. So, are the laws of nature fixed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I think from what we have seen at our, when we look at the universe, we usually look at it as, here's the macro universe, that is the one that we walk around in every day. And then there's like this atomic universe where we have like atoms and molecules and things like that. And in the macro universe, yeah, it seems pretty fixed. You throw apples up, they come back down. Wind blows, and it seems like things keep following these laws over and over again, at least where we've been able to observe. From my understanding, and I have never studied the micro universe, it seems that all those things actually follow a probability of occurrence as opposed to a deterministic, like this will definitely happen. We say in the atomic level that things will happen with some probability. So like quantum mechanics is the study of that area. And I'm not really actually, for some reason, I've never really cared about physics. But
okay.
I know nothing of these things except that I know that it's based on probability as opposed to determinism. So that's a little bit weird because
it is weird. Yeah, it's super weird.
Yeah. So like, yes, it seems like it's fixed, but if you were an atom, you might think differently.
Yes. So something like, for instance, big G or the speed of light, is there variability with those things?
So I don't think we see that.
What is big G?
Huh?
What is big G?
I don't know. Is it gravity?
Gravitational constant?
Yeah, it's this constant number that we use as convenience in gravity equations, like how we can use it. I think, again, I've really studied none of physics. These are just things I've gathered from papers. I've employed some physics to say, well, this is kind of like gravity, so we're going to use it in our model. And I'm like, oh, it's kind of like gravity, cool. I mean, it's not a bad thing.
Fair enough.
Physicists got into AI and did all these models where they said, well, the flow of people through city streets is a lot like the diffusion of water. So we built this model and look, it works pretty well. So the other, I mean, kind of the bigger picture on all of that is like, is it fixed? It's like, well, if you're at this atomic level and you're all in probability space, I have studied probability extremely thoroughly. You end up with, if you've got a trillion of these things happening every moment at an atomic level, then what you're actually interested in is what's the expected value of these probabilities? What do we expect to happen on average? And that expected value becomes so strong and so peaked that what we observe in the macro universe is seemingly deterministic because it's just so, for all the things to happen randomly to make that different, just doesn't happen. It's not expected. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting.
It is. It really is fascinating.
And so how does astrology fit into all this?
So I've never studied astrology. And from what I know, there's a lot of interest in work. It has been for a very long time in the times that people were born. And that follows a very peculiar numbering system, based on how our Earth moves around the sun and how the patterns of the stars change throughout the course of the year. So that's probably a better question for you.
I'm always interested to hear people's scientific perspectives on astrology, because it's, you know, shall we say, it's not a hard science.
Right. So I can definitely give you that. I mean, I think the first impulse is to say, show me the research. Show me, like, if one was to say you're a Pisces and therefore you have these tendencies, the way that we would want to set up an experiment to test that would be to grab a ton of Pisces, right? And then have this prediction. And like, this is actually exactly how I evaluate the models that I build, is have them all make predictions and figure out if over and over again, we see that, yes, this is the thing that happened. And the way we would formulate that in statistics is we would say, there is this population of Pisces out there, right? And so we're just getting a sample of them, right? You're always just getting, 1,000 of them or 100 of them or something. And we're interested to see if this outcome is true for them. We would want to build a confidence around that estimate of here's what's going to happen. And the more that we see our prediction true over all these samples, the higher the probability would be if we were to do this experiment over and over and over again an infinite number of times. It always comes back to infinity in modern mathematics. Then, if we were to do the experiment an infinite number of times, then the higher the confidence interval that we would get this outcome, the smaller shred that we would get a different outcome, although there is always a shred. So then we would say that we want that to be like 99.9% of the time. I think Science and Nature journals have recently proposed something like 99.99, and no one in psychology or medicine likes this because they have like 30 samples, and building probabilities like that is completely untenable. So that would be my initial impulse, is like, let's test it and see, because if you can make predictions based on stars, it's incredibly powerful. But I'm not very knowledgeable in the area, so I'm not sure.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what often comes up when we get into a scientific perspective of this is that it becomes very difficult because of the number of variables that we have. Right. When you look at somebody's birth chart, you don't just have Pisces, you have your moon sign, your rising sign, the placement of all your planets. And then, obviously these other massive variables, like where were you born? Who are your parents? Do you have siblings? Like, what was going on in the world right there in that moment? And it just like the variables stack up to infinity. And I mean, something I always like to think about, and my wife likes to is the one who pointed this out to me, is if you think, like, sort of the most stereotypical argument against astrology is like, well, if he's a Pisces and I'm a Pisces, why aren't we the same, or why aren't we that similar? And it's like, at the very base level, from the beginning, you have different souls. Like you're 100% different people. Even if you're born in the same hospital in almost the same moment, you might have a really similar birth chart, but you will have, different souls and different parents and different siblings, and, on and on and on and on.
Right.
So yeah, it becomes very difficult to study it in a scientific way because of those things. But I do think you could reduce it down to some very simple, or the most simple parts of it, and see what you could find. On this subject, what are your spiritual or religious beliefs, or lack thereof?
Yeah, I guess I think my first real strong memory from religious experience was I was at a Christian church, my parents, and everyone was standing in line to receive communion, which was some bread and wine. And I saw all these people lining up, and I nudged my parents. I said, I want some of that too. And I said, well, you can't, you haven't been confirmed yet. I was like 4, and I said, okay, but I still want to get in that line and get like.
I guess that line.
I don't care about your rules. So I was quite insistent, apparently, and they convinced Father Chris, different Chris, of course, that, or they didn't convince him. I think they just said, hey, like, Chris would really like to go and do this. And he said, sure, go ahead, do it. That's my first memory. Apparently the first thing that happened with me in religion is I was in Sunday school, and I said, I don't want to go to Sunday school anymore. I want to go to big person church. And then I went to big person church, got communion, and said, I don't want to do big person church anymore. And so I didn't do big person church anymore. And then religion just kind of fell out of my life for a long time, because I had, at a very young age, like, very strong opinions about religion, at least, or maybe just strong opinions about my time and how I spent it.
Yeah, understandably so.
But what was most influential for me was a period of time in my life where I was just studying a lot of survival skills, and it was about when I was 20 years old and trying to figure out what my place in the world was. And I think a lot of people find, their spiritual direction when they're searching for meaning. We're blessed and cursed with these big neocortexes, which have us thinking all the time and trying to figure things out, as opposed to just eating and mating and being like, I'm good. So I was trying to figure that out, and this guy Tom Brown wrote a lot about what he had learned from this Apache Indian scout, and the main takeaway was everything is connected, and I don't think any physicist would argue this point. So it's actually not in any ways different than science, and there will be a time when your molecules are mixed with the politician's molecules that you despise the most, and so right? I mean, it's all dust. I think the Eagles has a nice song about that one, and it was referred to by the Apache Indians as the spirit that moves all things. And this is just this energy that's moving through all of us. And so I guess my spiritual belief is that we're all made out of the same stuff. So whether you're talking about the stone on your front lawn or something that you would consider a weed, although that word doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because like that's a weed and that's something we eat, and then that changes over time.
Yeah,
seems ill-defined from a mathematical perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah, makes sense. Societal construct, right. ever-changing societal construct.
It's like language; it just keeps changing meaning.
There are some general characteristics that weeds often have, though.
I guess so. Yeah, that is true. I think you could argue that point. Yeah, I think that may be the point. But it just made me think about respecting everything and everyone and trying to see their point of view, whether it's an inanimate object or a politician you really don't like, which is, I think, a lot of us are feeling today.
Sure.
But you do need to remember that one day your molecules and atoms will be mixing with them, so you may want to find a good way to get along.
That's a fun way to think about it, or interesting way to think about it. Yeah. We'll maybe get into politics a little bit later here, but I wanted to touch on something that I think a lot of unscientifically minded folks like to say, that it's all connected, and I'm wondering what type of what information can you give us about that? Like, how is that literally true?
What we've seen over and over again is that things tend toward entropy, and that just means that they tend toward disorder. In the statistics, we consider disorder entropy. In fact, there's a fabulous book about this. It's this guy, Information Theory this is the original book by Kilbook, Information Theory and Statistics, right? So if you want to know the meaning of life, this is one of the books you should pick up. And the whole idea...
Good to know. I wouldn't have probably found that one.
Probably not. But and this is a lot of the reason why I picked up math, because I was trying to understand stuff. And if you wanted to quantify what is entropy is something that's totally unpredictable. And we talk about it in terms of probability distributions. So if you have a nice bell curve, which I think we're all familiar with, right? You have this peak, and this is the thing that's most likely to occur, right? And so bell curves occur all over. For example, intelligence, 100 IQ is at the peak of that bell curve, right? That is the most common intelligence to have. And as you go above and below it, it becomes less and less likely. On the other hand, there's the uniform distribution, which looks like this. It's a flat line. Everything is equally likely. When you think about information, what Shannon originally did early on in computer science was pose the question, how much memory, how much paper or bytes, whatever you're using to record information, would you need to hold all the information in this distribution of possibilities? And if you have a uniform distribution, you have to know every single thing. You have to write it all down because they're all equally likely. Whereas if you have this bell curve, some things are much more likely than other things. So you can write it down with much less paper or use much less bytes on a computer. So we actually say that that has less information because we can describe it more succinctly. So when things are tending towards entropy, what we see is that you mix a bunch of stuff together and it comes together. Usually things mix really well. And if you burn something, things turn to smoke and it mixes, and things turn to ash and it mixes in the physical world. So the only things that we really find that don't mix well are living things, because they are bent at establishing, and this is an immunologist perspective, what is me and what is them. And I would like to maintain me because I want to stay me. And that's why we in general don't grow branches and rocks on us, because we are trying to establish me and not become part of the environment. And then when we die, we do exactly the opposite. We have no more of this energy that's keeping us separate from everything around us, and then we mix. So that's kind of the physical. When you die, you join entropy and mix, right? And it's very hard to describe what you are anymore. But when you're living, it's very easy to say you are Alec and you are in LA. But when you die, it's going to be very hard to point out exactly where you are. And it's going to take a lot of information to describe where the hell is Alec 50 years after death. You'll be in worms, or you'll be in the air, or you'll be in the ocean. And that's going to take a lot of paper.
Indeed it will. So like, what does happen when you die?
Yeah, God. So I mean, what I know for sure is that all of that happens, unless you,
sure.
You know, you're like in a stone thing and like you stay there and nothing's allowed in, and it's. But eventually that stone's going to go away, and you're going to. So at some point, you're going to mix.
Yes. And do you believe that there's anything that transcends that or becomes separate from that process, or what do you think about all that?
Here's how I think about it. So there was a lot of time before I was born, right? But that didn't. What?
So much, yeah, lots of time.
But to me, it didn't seem like a long time because I wasn't observing that. So when I die, in all likelihood, I'll probably stop observing what's going on, and that time's going to just fly right by. And then it seems like if things were just to go on forever and we were to mix forever, that me, with some very slim probability, would reform again and be like, I'm back.
In the same sort of way.
And it'd be the blink of an eye for me. I would just wake up again and be like, oh, I'm back. But
do you think that the observer, upon death, the observer is no longer observing, in a sense?
Well, I don't have an answer to that question.
Most people don't.
But I do think there's a lot that we don't. So there's this phenomena where like people know when they're being looked at. Just go sit at a coffee shop and just start looking at someone. They'll look back at you.
Oh yeah, that's been scientifically studied quite a bit, actually.
So it's we don't, but we have seen it happen. We have shown that it's true. We have no frickin' idea on an energetic level why that's happening. We can't measure the looking at you waves, measure the response feeling of that, and then the probability of looking back. We don't have any idea what that is. And so I think one of the limitations of science is that it's really bent on being right until it isn't anymore. And so a great deal of effort goes into not being wrong. And we are wrong, and we do revise being wrong. But because of that, it moves very slowly. And so we know very, very, very little. So right now, for me, as a scientist, to say, well, I know exactly what will happen when I die, that could certainly be a hypothesis. But at this point, for me, I do know one thing is that I'm going to mix whatever energy. And the other thing that's probably more important than that is that everything I've done in my life, all the energy that I put out there, that will have impacted the world that I've traversed. And so you leave a legacy, whether you like it or not, in energy, in matter. You poop somewhere, that poop exists, and it's going to be part of something. That's your legacy.
It exists.
Or if you're a great scientist, you leave some books for a while. Or if you're a terrible ruler, you leave a lot of bodies somewhere. We all have an energetic legacy, and then we're going to mix. And that's about where I'm at with that, philosophically speaking.
Cool. I appreciate hearing your perspective on it. That was one of the things I found most interesting when I was studying this in college. You remember I went through the life and death and rebirth in my exploration of infinity. And once I got to the death, it's like, wow, wait a minute. Like hardly anybody actually knows. Some people say that they know though, which is also really interesting. Yeah. Like there's quite a bit of documentation of what actually happens, which is pretty interesting too. Like people have gone there or gone through it and come back with some sort of memory or consciousness, which is really wild to think about.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to you can't really discredit it and you can't really credit it. It's just kind of out there. I mean it's nobody say that it, and I think there's a lot of scientists would say that's bullshit, but I would like to see a reason why it's bullshit, just as much as I'd like to see a reason why it's just shit.
Right.
Good shit. I don't know. We don't really have a good antonym for bullshit.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to just yell bullshit on something and not have any.
It's too easy, I think it's good to keep an open mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So when people say something like believe in science or trust the science, there's something a little bit weird about that. What do you think about that?
I'm really glad you brought that up. So one of the outcomes of the recent Black Lives Matter protests has been these signs that are showing up in people's yards that says, no human is illegal, science is real. This is right along the lines of, but it's the other stuff, is all fine. The one that I take issue with is science is real. And this is terribly upsetting to me because this suddenly creates this potential to argue about whether or not science is real. And science is neither real nor fake. It is just what it is. It is a method that our species has come up with that is very, very basic, really. You have a hypothesis. You do experimentation to try and prove your hypothesis using good quantitative methods. And then whatever the outcome is, you accept and you write about it. And then other people go out and try and reproduce what you've done to confirm what you've observed. So it's really just a process for observing things over and over again and showing that they are that way over and over and over again. So that's not really real, and it's not really fake. It's just a system that was, it's like kind of calling like cell phones real. Like, it's like, well, they just got made and now we have cell phones. So you might like them or you might not like them, but it's not real or fake. It's just a system we invented. And, if you want to use it, if you think it has benefits, like creating, and we do find things like medicine and also cell phones being created using science, so that's pretty cool. I think, as I pointed out, science has some trouble describing some of these other things that are prevalent in the human condition. But this whole real thing is just kind of like, come on, believe in science. It's kind of like saying believe.
It's okay, you guys can come on in.
It's like believe in the written word. It's like, well, I don't know. We wrote it. I mean, it's the is the because we said it's the.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I also think that it's being referred to almost in the sense of being a religion.
Yeah, it's
like believe in science. Like, no, like what science? Like which science? There's lots of different expressions of it, and it's not intended it's not intended to be dogmatic, is what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. It's just a thing we made and we use and we found it useful, and it does a lot of great things. And it's not the answer to everything that the human condition grapples with.
It's an incredibly useful method.
Yeah, we find many uses for it.
Hey, sweetie. No. And podcasting, yeah.
No.
Carl says no podcasting.
Take a break for a second. I could get a water if you want to say hello to your.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's take a quick pause and we'll get back to it in a moment.
I understand. I don't have a professional laboratory either, so I often have visitors and dogs barking and babies knocking at the door.
Baby's knocking. Yes, indeed.
So goes life.
Mm-hmm. So, where were we?
We were just finishing up discussing science is real, and it's maybe not so dogmatic as it is just a system. And then people that really think or know that things are real for their belief after death, and just saying that, well, it's hard to prove or disprove anything like that. It's just, it's just hard. And that is kind of what it is.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's switch gears for a sec here. You're a new father. Congratulations.
You as well.
Thank you. What has been the most unexpected part of that for you?
I think how quickly children learn and are clearly thinking and understanding everything that's going around them. She was 8 months in, clearly able to understand what we were saying without being able to speak, which I think for her was like the greatest frustration on earth.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, they find it very frustrating.
So that was the biggest surprise for me during all of this.
What's been the hardest part?
She really doesn't need to sleep.
She doesn't.
I mean, she does sleep, but she doesn't need to. Like, and my wife, Brittany, sleep was like almost recreational. It was like a hobby, you know. Like, what do you feel like doing? I don't know. Maybe I'll have a good sleep, which is very different than me. And
That's so funny.
I think you.
Yeah, interestingly, my wife is the same way. I'm like, oh no, I have to go to sleep again. I have so much I want to do.
Right. You've married well, likely. You've married a counterpart that will balance you, but
yeah.
But
to go to sleep.
Because you know babies are breastfed and come out of mommies, they often really need mommy in those earlier months and even years. So for mommy not to be super into sleep, and for daddy, who maybe is more comfortable staying up later or waking up and being okay the next day, that was really difficult. And also, by the way, like the amount that she didn't want to sleep would have genuinely driven me just, crazy as well. Like she's like, I just think I'll wake up every 3 hours for like a year and a half. So that was pretty much the deal.
Yeah, it's incredibly challenging for sure.
It's not a gross.
I underestimated how challenging it was going to be to really have your sleep schedule fucked with on that level. I think that's, yeah. There's a reason why everybody says that's the hardest part, because it puts you in this like psychological exhaustion place that, unless you do some sort of weird sleep deprivation challenge in your life, you just don't need to go there. There's no reason.
When I was in graduate school, I became under such stress and pressure that I began to hear a ringing in my ears, which I like to call tinnitus, which I think is pronounced incorrectly. It's supposed to be pronounced tinnitus. And I didn't sleep for weeks. And when I say didn't sleep, I mean I really didn't sleep for weeks.
Wow.
For a couple of hours, maybe. And I was just always anxious, always stressed. And, and it wasn't that bad for Brittany, but mine was for 2 or 3 weeks. And then, then that was it. But she had to do this kind of perpetual wake up 4 to 6 times a night for a year and a half. So that's, and I was involved in a lot of that, but not like she was. It was a totally different game.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really.
No.
It's one of those things that the father just has to be the support, because it's like, you're not what she wants.
Well, that's. You're the last line, and then this miracle thing happened in July where she would sleep with me and be happy about it, and I could do that. And then she also just started sleeping a lot more, and since then it's been like coming out of for Brittany like a nightmare, and everything's cool.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you guys are coming through to the other side there.
Yeah, me too.
So. Switching gears again, we've been getting to this weird place in our society right now. Just for context, everybody, we're in November 15th, 2020. It's been like notably like the weirdest year maybe that I've ever experienced. The history books will tell you a lot of stories about it. And there's been a certain level of really questioning what is reality, what is true. There's a lot of questioning of what is true. and this kind of like this idea that we can't even agree on what are fundamental truths, which is very troubling. I think very troubling to me and to a lot of people. What's your scientific mathematical perspective on this trend?
Well, I think like a lot of people's, the very first is just kind of frustration. Um, it's almost like reading. I like to read magical realism, and for whatever reason, if you write a book in the genre of magical realism, uh, the way I would describe that entire genre is like there's like horses and bows and swords or whatever. So they all happen in a very particular place and time, magically. Um, but in that particular place and time, there are kings and there are lords and and truth is what we want truth to be. And what's so interesting is that we went through this stage where there's this Renaissance and there's this period of time, this Enlightenment period where masses of people began to get access to the written word. They were able to read and they were able to think about things and communicate in ways that they were never able to before. And what this did for society was allow us to communicate our ideas, decide that we didn't like our king, decide that the earth was round, etc. And then here we are in 2020, and there are conferences in High Point, North Carolina, at the Holiday Inn, contending that the earth is not round, that it is indeed flat. And that has come out of this exact thing, this access to information, whereas information for a while was just expensive enough that you couldn't just peddle it willy-nilly. You had to have it published, you had to have it. And what's happened is that now anyone, you don't need to know how to like operate a website or anything. You could just make a post and people that thought like you and liked you would believe it, because that's what we're designed to do. We're designed to trust those around us, and it's a very deep survival mechanism in what is a very social species. So I think now we're seeing the consequences of a format in which we had always assumed meant information was good, i.e. this kind of pseudo-published, like it's on the internet, it's in a post, it seems plausible, it agrees with me and my beliefs. And now we're seeing people, really arguing basic facts, like, does the coronavirus exist? Which I think, of course, the scientific community were like, well, sure, we've sequenced it, we've identified it, but other people might contend that, and that report on the CDC format looks strangely similar to a Facebook group that says it doesn't exist and that it's all written and it's spell checked, and so it's a big shift for us as a society, and it's one to be grappled with, I think.
So it does exist.
Well, I, as someone who uses the system of science previously discussed, it does feel quite strong that the coronavirus exists. I don't, like, I understand conspiracy theories where like one government body in one place says something and doesn't really have any evidence. But when the entire world of scientists is publishing evidence for something independent of government bodies, and it's kind of hard to, like, if you were to rank conspiracy theories on plausibility, be like, look, like, every scientist in the medical profession across the planet's working on this. What government is behind it? Like, but then there are some like fanatical theories about what, not government, but groups of people or religions are behind it. And they always have been. And then of course Trump applied really really worked that voter base. I mean, he really worked the empty the swamp area. He brought a lot of voters out of not voting because they thought the whole thing was a conspiracy. And he said, "Hey, I'm here to break this conspiracy." And so it's also, I mean, it's been supported at the highest government level that one might argue of the free world. So yeah, I mean, it's not like it just happened because of social media. It was very intentional from a leadership perspective.
Very strange times.
Yeah. Strange times, man.
Yeah, I mean, I will admit that I've gotten the most sucked into conspiracy theories that I ever have.
Yeah.
I never have actually in my life. I've always been like, I don't need more, like, I don't need that information, you know, it's not helping me to be any more paranoid, you know, it's like, it's just,
yeah.
I consider your mind to be a very important sacred place, and what you're putting into it is going to directly affect how you feel and how you act, and really just about everything around you. I
didn't know if you guys were.
Yeah.
And for my perspective of being sucked into some of that type of stuff was, there's like what we're looking at, what's actually happening in the country right now, or specifically in the early days of lockdown, just objectively looked a lot like an authoritarian regime.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it was like, you know, all over the world, different countries all over the world were kind of all of a sudden making this type of behavior acceptable, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or, you know, we're forced to accept it basically, and saying it's for the good of the country, for the good of the world, for you to accept X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And to me, that like there's something very scary about that. I still feel that way. It's like I have a hard time seeing the perspective that government should be able to dictate what anybody can do on that level. It's like really taking away freedoms on a drastic level.
Yeah.
For a virus that appears to be not all that deadly.
No.
Like, we know that. We know, like, scientifically that's been proven. So it's like, it's very contagious, I guess, but it's not all that deadly. So
right.
That's what was very scary to me, is like watching these policies roll out and watching, you know, sort of widespread acceptance of them and being like, this sure does look like authoritarian control, but it's for our own good.
No, I mean, I think it's a very valid perspective to have, and I think it's widely shared. And the death rate, at least last I checked, is it's not very high. It's about twice that of the flu. And furthermore, you know, our daughters are more likely to die of the flu than the coronavirus because it tends to target people that are older and that have pre-existing conditions, right? So it's kind of like the best pandemic we could have had, because like it would be terrible to have a pandemic that targeted children, right?
Yeah, terrible, horrible.
We all kind of expect, like, well, if you're 70, you have lived a good life. I mean, you've lived, maybe not a good life, but you've lived a life. You have we at least, but we don't want kids who are 7 to die because we don't even feel like they've had a shot at it. So, I think what's interesting in all of it is that there's, I mean, right, it was, I think the real, and this is what sometimes people forget, like the real goal was to prevent the medical systems from breaking down And because no one had any immunity, like most of us have immunity to the flu in some degree or another, and we get flu shots. So like, people get the flu and they die, and the death rate is about half that of the coronavirus. But like, you're not talking about huge numbers of people. So the concern is that if we had medical systems at capacity, which now in some states we actually do, like North Dakota, that other people that just had, other random things. I had a heart attack, or, I'm a diabetic. Well, no, that's actually solved disease. I need to get a blood transfusion, whatever, that these people would get less appropriate care. So then all these people that weren't in this older, higher risk category would begin to suffer because of that. I honestly don't think anyone had a good answer. And I think, based on your perspective, I think it's easy to see, like, are people overstepping their bounds? And there have been, in Michigan, we found that, yes, the bounds were overstepped with a number of these mandates. And
extremely, yeah.
I think it's a good show of checks and balances. I think also just my own perspective on it is, I was okay with us making sure, trying to spend a little time studying this and understanding this was, what it was. It was death rate wasn't that high. We had some idea of how to control it. We'd never lived the medical systems. But you can't stop people's lives forever. And also, to your point, you probably shouldn't be able to, because we don't live in an authoritarian government.
Yeah, that's a hard no. I think in the end, like, we need to protect the vulnerable.
Right.
People need to live their lives. Like the idea of keeping people in prisoner in their own houses for these, sort of indefinite periods of time, closing down the beaches and closing down the parks. It's like, there's not any science backing that up. In fact, the science gives the exact opposite evidence, which is those are probably the best places to be.
Yeah, an interesting bit was that the most common spreading places were in your home, having your relatives over, in indoor spaces where people were talking loudly, and air wasn't circulating well. So being at a park, to your point, probably one of the least risky places you could be. And
yeah,
I do think that's, I think that was a failing of, being outside and being in these public places is something that we should all be doing right now, if any.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
massive failing. Like, that's just, I see it as like depriving people of their basic human rights.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you wouldn't
very, very literally. And it's a travesty and a tragedy that we've done that and are continuing to do that in some places. I think we may be coming into some increased restrictions in California again. Feel super thankful to be living somewhere that is warm and I can kind of still get outside and get sunlight and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest, like, I was freaking out when when I just felt totally trapped. I felt totally powerless, and I was like, a lot of my happiness comes from physical activities outdoors.
Oh yeah.
So the idea that the government can suddenly take that away is is deeply, deeply troubling to me, and continues to be.
Yeah, the government can do, even in democracies, they can do quite a bit. I never, from my own perspective, and maybe it's because of the sports I choose to play, but like, running and tennis and biking, and like in our neighborhood, people, we all would walk around and take runs and do things without masks because it was really easy to not be too close to people. So I always said that we were so lucky because we weren't in a very dense area. That for us, we could be outside all the time and really do life about as the main change in my life was I didn't go to the office, which was actually in many ways fantastic because then I had an outdoor standing desk, which I love. Like, but if I were in a city or something, I just, oh my gosh, like, it's just I mean, I am in a city, but like Raleigh's a very suburban city,
Yeah.
And I just had a baby, so I'm just kind of already like at home a lot.
Yeah, we probably had some similar timing with that. We had the newborn quarantine and then the coronavirus quarantine kind of stacked on top of each other. We're like, well, our lives are kind of like this already, but
yeah, no, it was a lot, dude.
It's been a really interesting time. And so what about, have you seen much evidence for, like, for instance, wearing masks outside?
Not if you're, I mean, I think the idea is it spreads through the air. It's concentration and dose. So, if you're outside and you're running around, like, for example, I go play tennis and I go play clinics and we're all hanging out and we're standing in lines and going and hitting balls and stuff. And so, like, let's say someone had the coronavirus, right? And like, I see people that are old and, are in a higher risk category. In all likelihood, even if I breathe in a little bit, through the outside air, like, I'm not going to get it. It's probably nothing but good for me. So we don't wear masks. The club doesn't require that we wear masks because we're all in these big open areas. And we're not always socially distant, but we're outside and you're not just like talking face to face to someone for, 15 minutes, 3 feet away. That's not what you do in tennis, so, but I see these people, like, they'll be jogging and they have a mask on. I'm just kind of like, but there's just not, I just feel like the information hasn't been great because, don't yell at someone who might be sick and then go visit your grandparents from 3 feet away. But if you're outside in general, it's probably fine. And if you're at a restaurant or something and you're indoors and there's good airflow, and the people at your table are all kind of like your bubble or whatever, you're probably not going to be a spreader, just from what we know about how it spreads at this point. So there's kind of like two camps. There's like no restrictions and then like all restrictions, and like I'm a moderate, like, so I'm just kind of like, let's just figure out what makes sense.
Yeah, the like extreme polarization, politicization of the, like, figuring out how to get through this has been really frustrating to watch. Like, masks versus no masks, and if you don't wear a mask, you're killing grandma. If you do wear a mask, you're submitting to the, overlords, and like, there's probably quite a lot of gray area here. Like, but yeah, I mean, that would be a little bit too reasonable for the political discourse in our country right now. So,
like most things, there's a pretty moderate middle ground, which is pretty good.
Yeah. So should we be living our lives in fear and constantly terrified of this virus, or should we? Is there another way?
No, I don't think so. I think just taking, like you said, like reasonable precautions, just to, because what we're really talking about is probability, right? Like, what we're trying to do is not reduce all the probability that it will spread, right? Because that's draconian. That's, as to your point, it's too much. We should just be doing what we can in a reasonable fashion. And I think at this point, now that we've really studied the virus and understand it, the goal is just to try and keep the medical systems from getting so stressed that, people of all sorts of illnesses are dying unnecessarily. At the same time, people have to go about their lives. And this is not Ebola, right? It's not a terrible death rate that's decimating the planet. So I think like anything else, we should neither be living in fear nor just completely ignoring everything. I think it's okay to like when I go into a store, I put on a mask. And like the recommendation is, if you're indoors and you cannot socially, if social distancing is impossible, just put on a mask, talk, do your thing, and that kind of keeps your air like right around here. And then, you know, and if you're not, step back and take off your mask and talk. I mean, it's, so I think, I also like living in fear. I mean, to your point, like almost no one really has to really fear this virus. I think it's more of like a risk reward thing for the country. And some people genuinely do. And I do think at this point, people that are at a higher risk level should be taking precautions themselves to make sure that we need to shift the burden a little bit. We can't have all of society continue in this so that a very small segment of it can go about with no fear, right? And
yeah, it seems like it's been this really sort of absurd single factor analysis where the absolute worst possible thing that can happen to anybody is coronavirus, and everything else must be ground to a halt for the sake of avoiding this one outcome. And it's just like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not not an economist, but it's pretty fucking terrifying what the effect of, you know, global lockdowns is actually having on, like, people are starving, right? Right now, people are starving because of these decisions that were made, and they're going to continue to be. And I think we haven't seen the extent of the consequences that's going to be unfolding over the course of years.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, including myself, feel that way about kids being in schools, and younger people feeling they can socialize. And I think, like you said, like, I think a human life is worth $250,000. Economists are figuring this out as to what it really is costing society, and it is. There's a quantitative argument to be made, none of which I see in the headlines, but in my lifetime, the headlines are usually quite sensational versus quite, here's the best scientific course for us. Because what do you really want to do? You want to maximize happiness and minimize unhappiness, maybe. But I mean, if you go to a doctor, you tell the doctor, like, well, you know, I like to have 15 drinks a week. They say, well, you really should be having 14 drinks a week. So you should do everything you can to only have 14 drinks a week. But because they're only optimizing for longevity, right? And this is, again, where I feel like science is very basic. And, you know, the medical community will do anything to get you into the ideal spot in the curve. But they won't ever factor in anything that you might be like, well, maybe 15 drinks a week is the magic number for me to have a better life, you know, or something like that. So I just, you know, unfortunately, society is very advanced in many ways, but in terms of, you know, a holistic approach to finding a good way for society to move forward from this, we're not even doing it in one-on-one healthcare prior to this whole thing, much less in, you know, global pandemic. How do we make sure that, you know, we minimize the cost of this thing, factoring in that human life has a cost? And I also don't think anyone's terribly eager to go and say, we can lose 100 million and we'll be all right, because they'd immediately be demonized, you know?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's been I think one of the most difficult things about it is it seems like generally all of the situations we've been put in have been based on politicians trying to save their reputation, in a sense.
Correct.
And that's happening on the global scale, which is really, it's crazy to watch.
It's politics, man.
It's pretty shocking at the moment.
Not science.
But I don't want to go on and on about the virus. Just for some, if people are watching this years and years in the future, this will be a weird idiosyncrasy of this time.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not something that just lasts and lasts and lasts, because I can pretty safely say that anybody listening to this is probably pretty sick of living in this restrictive way. I mean, I think
Yep.
it's a challenging time.
Yeah, it's not
Um,
my favorite.
Before we go, I want to get to something that personally is a topic of interest. I know that we're slowly starting to wake up to the idea that certain psychedelics like psilocybin and MDMA may actually have some sort of benefit to people. Can you believe it? And so I wanted to hear a little bit about your perspective of what you've seen of that science.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, actually. There's been a horrible dearth of research in the area of any drug that's illicit in this country. And part of that is simply because it's illicit. And if you want to do research in the area and you have to grab a bunch of marijuana or MDMA or psilocybin to do it, there's a lot of hoops to jump through. And quite literally, it's expensive and it's also very bureaucratic. And so while it's possible to do research in this areas, most labs in these areas are hard pressed to be able to actually really do it. It's difficult to do retrospective studies of people that have smoked a joint every day for 60 years for a whole variety of reasons. But there's actually, as you point out, there's a lot of really interesting work in neuroscience in this area. And like, for example, things like LSD, we see horizontal connections light up. So what you hear, what you see, what you touch is connected in a way that isn't usual, right? So we put people through MRI machines and we see the different parts of the brain light up, and they just light up in interesting ways horizontally across our senses. And that's why people have hallucinations, visual, auditory. That's why people, when they take mushrooms, may connect ideas they haven't before, because we're just lighting up neurons that aren't usually lit up. I'm a artificial intelligence practitioner, so a lot of my work is involved in helping these algorithms, which most commonly today are a very loose representation of the human brain, learn. And if your objective in life is to build a model of the world so that you can get food, water, sex, maybe some higher level things, happiness, it may not always be beneficial for you to put together some of these other things that you might if you had a drug that's giving you that opportunity to your direct survival. So we don't usually evolve to get these horizontal connections out of the gate, is all I'm really saying. I know a therapist who is involved in like ketamine research to help people with things like alcoholism, and apparently this tranquilizer gives people this kind of out of body experience, and in therapeutic uses, it's very helpful for them to maybe understand, maybe from an outside perspective, what's really going on with them, and to I don't really know anything more about it than that, but I mean, human beings have used drugs forever. They're hugely beneficial when used in positive ways. They can certainly cause addiction and problems when used in negative ways, but my own opinion is we should study these things and learn about them and have them help us realize our potential and not fear them. And so you know, all this, you know, why is like pot illegal and alcohol legal? This is like the whole argument when I was growing up as a teenager, right? Well, it's cultural, right? I mean, it's, they're very easy arguments showing that alcohol is a much more harmful drug than marijuana, but now people, well, you don't want them to be a dope head. But that's all just cultural stuff. Like it's just kind of silliness. So I'm excited that, you know, we're as a society seeing some of that, and research is getting easier. And, yeah, I think there's a lot of great potential for our species in this area.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I have I guess, a fairly libertarian style perspective on that, which is I feel like people should be able to explore those things in whatever way they see fit. And it's not the government's business to tell you what you can and cannot do in that regard, as long as, you know, we have plenty of other laws to prevent you from doing X, Y, and Z if you happen to be doing that under the influence. So I think it's important to remember that those laws are in place. And yeah, I believe in personal freedom.
Well, you know the most interesting thing that's come out of this whole like masks debate, I mean, not to steer back towards the virus, but I think it is relevant in terms of the conversation of personal freedoms, right? Like, people got all mad, like, well, you can't make me wear a mask, right? You walk into a store and, you know, they say you need to wear a mask. Well, it's like you also have to wear a shirt, right? And as someone who during the summer months would, as often as possible, wear flip-flops and board shorts and nothing else, that's not a policy that I'm in favor of. I like being able to walk around without a shirt. But most places, I may not do so unless I'm at the beach, where people think that's okay, because apparently if you're already at the beach with your shirt off, they're cool with you coming to the store, essentially because they can sell you beer, and, you know, that's good for them. But like the shirt thing is harming no one, right? And when we ask ourselves, what is a personal freedom? I think we all agreed hundreds of years ago that you really should be able to do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't impinge on someone else's freedom. But we have all sorts of laws that do not impinge on other people's freedoms. I don't think the shirt thing is a law, but what about nudity, for example? I mean, if I'm just walking around the neighborhood naked, I'm hurting no one. I'm just naked.
As long as you're wearing a mask.
Well, not if I'm outside. And you know, it's difficult for me to understand why, but it's not. I mean, the reason why is because that's our culture. We're not naked people, right? We don't, as a culture, think it's okay to be naked, but it really doesn't impinge on anyone else's freedom. It might impinge on their opinion of what's normal.
Their sensibilities.
Sensibility, that's what I'm looking for. But what we begin to find is that many, many, many laws are not a consequence of answering the analytical question, will this and how much will this harm others? It's more like, what are we used to and what do we find normal, right? You can't buy booze on Sundays in North Carolina. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, but it's also not something that I'm going to go march in the street about, because I can live without buying booze on Sundays. So it's just to me, it all seems kind of silly, right? Like it makes sense if you're like, you know, you really shouldn't kill people, because that feels like it really impinges on someone else's freedom to live, right? And there's this whole cascade of things down from there about how much freedom you should have. And the social contract we have with government is all about that. And then if there are no laws, we'd have too much chaos. And if there were laws about everything, we'd all feel too confined. So I think it's and the ideal is, in a democratic society, we hope that the people can all voice their opinions and decide on a middle ground where they have most freedoms, and there's some things that we've all agreed they shouldn't do. And it's interesting. I mean, this comes up in the gun debate. It comes up in the abortion debate. It's establishing these lines of what's your right versus what's impinging on someone else's right. I mean, can I buy a gun? Well, you can buy a gun, but you can't shoot your neighbor. Oh, that makes sense to me. You know, but then people say, well, but if there's more guns, someone who might want to shoot your neighbor might get that gun. And, you know, it's complicated, right?
Very, yeah. And I think we're actually doing a pretty good job here in this country. I mean, I think there are a handful of laws that I strongly disagree with, and you know, for the most part, I think a lot of them make sense.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's crazy. I think it's okay, but it is an interesting topic of, well, you know, we give up personal freedoms all the time for the better of society, and the mass debate just kind of threw that into the limelight. And I think there is great argument.
Yeah. Well, it's like, you know, when I just thought of a really silly example about when they first decided that shirts shouldn't be allowed in stores, and I bet there was a bunch of people who were really anti the new short laws, but that example doesn't make sense because there's not a virus around, so
there's no nipple virus that's just jumping from nipple
yeah.
to nipple, infecting other nipples.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, you know, it's a new thing that has been taken away. So
right.
Naturally, like, I mean, most of us probably hate wearing masks. Like, it just sucks. Yeah. So like, there's a really strong desirability bias in the direction of anything that wants to tell us that this is a bad idea. Because it sucks. We don't want to wear them. Like, I don't know anybody who's like, I do know there's a lot of people who are kind of like, you know, pro-mask, I guess, but it's not because they love wearing masks. It's because they think it's the best thing in the interests of public safety. But yeah, there's a strong desirability bias in favor of any information that is going to tell us that we shouldn't be wearing them.
I'm gonna keep
I remember when it first started coming about, and you know, and even like there's a famous quote of Fauci saying that, like, not everybody should be going around wearing masks. That would be ridiculous. And then, you know, next thing you know, the whole world's wearing masks.
I actually consider that the biggest failing of the medical community, because the primary reason for that was so that people didn't buy all the N95s, and so that the medical workers would have access to them. And Fauci's defense of this was, well, we didn't have that specific research. But you're talking about an airborne virus, right? We knew it was an airborne virus. Covering up the face could only be good. But they were very concerned that, and there was this buyout. Everyone was going crazy, fear buying these things, and there's huge price gouging. And then the research came out, and then it's that kind of mixed messaging is not good for the people.
Yeah, it completely destroys trust, and I think that, you know, one of the most striking things about this time is just realizing like how deeply the people distrust their government and their politicians. It's like they were, yeah, I mean, almost completely across the board. I feel like that's the sentiment, and it's like, how did we get to this place where that is the case so overwhelmingly?
You know, it's so interesting. The economists did a little bit on this. People trust most scientists, and then like a shred of percentage points after that, military leaders. I mean, despite all like the arguments over things like global warming and mass work and all of that, it is interesting to see that if you just poll people, they're like, no, scientists are number one, military leaders are a really close second, and politicians, it's like, I trust my dog,
Yeah. I guess I shouldn't say that that's a recent development. It's pretty,
I elected, kind of
it's
tied
ancient.
for that angry dog down the street.
Yeah. It's an ancient mistrust of politicians for good reason.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Okay, so just want to wrap this up really quick because I know we got other time constraints happening. Get to some really important questions. What have you learned that you can teach?
Well, I can definitely teach you backwards and forwards on the mathematics behind AI, and then also a lot of pure math stuff.
Hold on, before you go any further with that, I know there's, for those of us who don't know that much about AI, kind of like where this comes up is this idea that like that it could be something that overtakes us in some sort of way. What's your perspective on that?
Oh, it's like everything else we've talked about. The things you read are extreme, and the truth is pretty moderate. It's not a bunch of crap. It's pretty powerful, but Terminator is nowhere near. We're nowhere near a Terminator. I can train algorithms to recognize images really well, and I can train an algorithm to play an Atari game better than the best human. And even now games like Go. But that is such a far cry from building something that can really make decisions and be given an objective and complete it, or decide its own objectives. It's just, we are so far from that.
You feel like there's an exponential trend in that direction though?
I think there's an exponential trend in pattern recognition. So pieces of what we would consider intelligence, like image recognition, classifying a document as being, this type of document, even classifying a sentence as being happy or sad on some continuous scale. But I mean, I think it's more of a threshold function, right? Where, you see us, we do this thing and it's great. And then we're kind of like this, and we do this thing and it's great. There may be a development in which we're able to figure out how to endow something with the ability to really make decisions on its own. Just the math and the computing power doesn't suggest that that's coming anytime soon.
Okay.
Which is why if you ask your a hard question, it's going to mess it up. And all it had to do was answer. It didn't have to figure out an interesting thing to say back.
So I don't need to be worried about AI taking over anytime soon.
I am not worried. I would not be worried.
Very good. Yeah, I have a policy of not worrying as much as possible.
You're safe on that one, in my opinion.
Great. Yeah, so if you could leave behind a quick message to the future, anybody who's watching this anytime in the future, what would you like to say to that person, those people?
Your energy changes the world. If you bring happiness to others and you bring love and empathy and understanding to others, especially in this time when people might have views that you hate and, morals that you despise. If you want to make an impact on people, love them, empathize with them, try and learn their perspective, and keep an open mind. And that energy, even if they never change, right? That's not really the point. The point is that you put out love, and the point is that people will feel that, and they'll be happier because of that. And if everyone is happier, there'll be less conflict, there'll be less war, there'll be less suffering. And that will be your legacy.
Amen, brother. Good to hear those words. Yeah, well, thanks a lot for joining me here, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Alec, it's lovely to see you, man.
You too. We'll have to do an episode 2. Sounds like we got a another good 10 to 15 hours of topics to get into.
Just scratch the surface. I agree.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Thanks for being here. We'll end the episode here. And now.
All right. Well.